Professor Stick asked me to do a guest video for him today, so I'm filling in while he does stick-related activities. I'm sure you can all guess what that entails. I'd rather not. I'm Telltale, and he and I have been friends since around the time he started YouTube a couple months after I did, in May 2016. And of course that means I'm way bigger than he is, so he can thank me. Well then, looks like he's doing me a favor. Thanks for having me on, old buddy. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting little death cult known as Jonestown. Let's get into it. So what is Jonestown? Is it a cult or what? It's probably one of the most famous cults of all time. I'm sure you guys probably know Holy Kool-Aid, another good buddy of mine. His tagline is, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid." The Jonestown cult is famous for a mass murder-suicide where Jim Jones, the leader, forced the members to drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide, Valium, chloral hydrate, and Phenergan. And interestingly enough, it's actually a misconception that it was Kool-Aid. It was Flavor Aid, not even name brand. Poor Kool-Aid, taking the blame for the whole debacle. There's obviously a lot of lead up that got these people to the point where they were willing to commit suicide, so let's start at the beginning and go through a little timeline. Jones was born on May 13th, 1931. He got really interested in communism around 1951 in his early 20s. Now, a lot of this is going to sound really charged. The US has historically hated communism since the Cold War, or even earlier. The US government even put out a lot of anti-communist propaganda during that time. I'm not taking a position on communism either way right now. This video is completely separate from that issue. I have solid, non-biased sources for this guy's beliefs, much of which is coming straight from his own mouth, or from interviews he did with his congregation members and recordings. And for reference, I'll leave most of my sources in the description if you guys want to do some further reading on it. Now let's continue. He believed that a good way to demonstrate his Marxism would be to infiltrate the church, so he started working toward that goal. In 1952, he became a student pastor at a Methodist church in Indiana. That was his first step toward being a religious authority figure. Eventually, he ended up leaving shortly after, claiming that they wouldn't let him integrate blacks into the church. Of course, this was 1952, so segregation was in full swing at this point. It didn't really start to let up a little bit until 1964 when the Civil Rights Bill was passed. But even then, it was pretty serious. So around the time he left the church, he witnesses a faith healing and decides to give it a shot. In 1956, he organized a giant conference. He did it with Oral Roberts to draw a bigger crowd, because even at that time, Oral Roberts was pretty famous. Let's take a quick detour. If you guys don't know who Oral Roberts is, you're lucky. But I'm about to smash that luck streak to pieces. Honestly, I didn't know who he was until I did research for this video. So I decided to do a search for Oral Roberts scandals, because every good televangelist worth their weight has a few scandals under their belt. And the first thing that comes up is this absolutely fantastic fundraising scam he ran, where he claimed that if he didn't raise a total of $8 million above regular ministry expenses by the following month, he would die. That's probably one of his more famous ones. You have to feel bad for the poor suckers who get pulled into that kind of scam. My grandmother is the type of person who would donate to that kind of thing. Seriously disappointing. Okay, done with the detour. Back to Jim Jones. So the convention with Oral Roberts had raised enough money for Jones to start his own church, which would eventually be called the People's Temple Christian Church. Then in 1960, he was appointed to director of the Human Rights Commission in Indianapolis, Indiana. Surprisingly, imagine this guy, head of a Human Rights Commission. Well, as it turns out, he actually made some real progress by doing things like racially integrating a number of businesses and public services. Turns out he really believed in ending segregation at a time when that was not a popular idea. He and his wife, Marceline, even adopted some non-Caucasian children, including the first African-American child to be adopted by a white couple in Indiana in 1961. So he was all about racial unity. And as I've mentioned on my channel before, there's usually a reason for that. Typically, when you see cults trying to end tribalism like that, it's because they want to focus that hatred on the outside world. I grew up Jehovah's Witness, which is what motivated me to start my channel in the first place. And since starting my channel, there's no end to the horrific, all too familiar stories from kids going through the same thing I went through when I was their age. Being kicked out of their homes by their parents as young as 16 years old. Not even legally old enough to work full time. And they're kicked out on the street like dogs. And like Jim Jones, Jehovah's Witnesses are pretty serious about ending the racial hatred and tribalism. But with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's because they want to turn that hate against against non-members or ex-members. They don't want it to be a black versus white issue. They want it to be an us versus them issue. The world versus God's people. I'm sure Jim Jones had plenty pure intentions in the whole thing, but anytime I see this kind of behavior, I'm very skeptical of their motives. Sorry, I get sidetracked sometimes. As I was saying, in 1963, Jones told his congregation that the world would be engulfed by a nuclear war on July 15, 1967, and from the ashes would rise a socialist Eden on Earth. See, that's another thing you see with cults all the time. End of the world predictions. Why do people keep making these? They've never come true, not once. And they say it with such confidence. So after making that prediction, he said the People's Temple had to move to Northern California for safety. And they did. The entire congregation went with him to Northern California. I can't even imagine what kind of money was involved in that whole endeavor. Within 5 years of moving to California, the temple started to grow. Fast. It started opening different chapters in multiple cities. By the 70s, he was preaching against Christianity, saying it was a tool to oppress non-whites and women. Another marker of a cult. They have insider versus outsider, black versus white thinking. My doctrine is the only correct doctrine. Everybody else is wrong, and they're all gonna die. There was a lot of mental manipulation going on, not just in that way, but in other ways you commonly find among cults. Stephen Hassan has something called the bite model, which kind of outlines a number of different ways cults try to control people, and the People's Temple hits a lot of those markers. So many, in fact, that they could have defined the damn thing. Come over to my channel to see a detailed breakdown of how Jonestown stands up to the bite model and where they are on the extremism scale. So this guy's going along indoctrinating and brainwashing so many people in the San Francisco area that he started to gain real political sway in the city. Rosalind Carter, Jimmy Carter's wife, even attended the opening of one of the chapters. Things seemed to be going pretty well until around 1977 when a reporter named Marshall Kilduff published an expose in New West magazine. Jones caught wind of it before it was published, and he moved his entire flock to a compound in Guyana, which, as it turns out, around 500 of his followers had been building since 1974, 3 years earlier. In Jones' words, the compound was supposed to be a socialist paradise, and most of the congregation abandoned family, jobs, homes, and friends to go with him to South America. At this point, the people were fully indoctrinated, completely brainwashed into submission. Can you imagine ever leaving your entire lives behind to follow some leader to South America? They believed him, with everything in them. So in 1977, some defectors and family members of the people who left for South America started a group called Concerned Relatives, which started communicating with the State Department about the goings-on inside the People's Temple in Guyana. Jones started feeling pressure from the group, and in 1978, Leo Ryan led a fact-finding mission to Jonestown. Jones held a reception for Leo and his party, and at first glance, Leo was pretty happy with what he saw. It appeared to be a happy, cohesive, and supportive community. Until the second day. Members started passing notes to Leo, saying they and their children are being held captive. So Leo talks to Jones about it, asks him what was going on, and he denied everything. He said the members were free to leave anytime they wanted, though actually they had to get express permission from Jones to leave. Everything came to a head when one of the members tried to attack Leo with a knife. The attack failed, but he decided to leave pretty much immediately. He managed to take 15 members with him who said they didn't want to be there anymore, and as Jones promised Leo, he didn't try to stop him. Interestingly enough, Leo Ryan told a follower that he was going to describe Jonestown in quote-unquote basically good terms. It got back to Jim Jones, who replied, "All is lost," even though it was an ostensibly positive review. I guess he wanted to hear, "I'll carry what I learned to my grave," or something, I don't know. So as the group reached the airstrip, Jones' armed guards, called the Red Brigade, showed up on a truck and started shooting at him. They killed Leo Ryan and 4 other people. At the same time, one of the supposed defectors started shooting at the people who had already boarded the plane, which explains why Jones let them leave without trying to stop them. Among other things, he had a follower with them the entire time. Imagine how brainwashed you have to be to unplug the propaganda and brainwashing for well over a year, get involved in a group of people aimed at taking your organization down, and still not break free of it. It had a deep hold on him. Anyways, Jones knew his little utopia couldn't last forever, long before Leo showed up. He had regularly held sermons where he'd talk about mass suicide in preparation for a day he called White Nights. That's Nights. There was at least one time when he told the congregation to drink liquid that he claimed had poison in it. And as it turned out, cyanide was being shipped to him at least 2 years before the event even took place. So to review the timeline, in early 1977 a reporter did an expose on the People's Temple, and right before it came out he moved himself and most of his congregation to South America. Fall of 1977, the Concerned Relatives group formed. November 1978, Leo Ryan went on his fact-finding expedition. So the congregation was there for about a year and a half, and he had the cyanide shipments going to the compound no earlier than 6 months before he decided to move there. So after the shooting went down, he started mixing the Flavor Aid and cyanide. Then he started the final sermon. He told the congregation that they'd have to kill themselves because the seniors and the children deserved to die in peace. He said the government attack would come any minute now. He said there were planes in the air with men about to parachute down on them. Of course, nobody was coming. It was all bullshit. And interestingly enough, there's a recording of that final sermon. It's pretty graphic stuff. Probably don't want to listen to it. But the way he talks is like a real pastor. He speaks with a pastor's voice and authority. He speaks like somebody who believes they're speaking with God's voice. He spent a good portion of the time arguing with one of the members, Christine Miller, about how she didn't want to die, and his responses were so pastoral. Take a listen to a couple short clips of the argument and notice his tone through the whole thing.
But I cannot separate myself from the pain of my people. And you can't either, Christine, if you stop to think about it. You can't separate yourself. We've walked too long together.
I know that, but I still think as an individual, I have a right to...
You do, and I'm listening.
What I think, what I feel, and I think we all have a right to our own destiny as individuals.
Right.
And I think I have a right to choose mine, and everybody else has a right to choose theirs.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. I'm not criticizing. I'm not doing that. What's that? Said today. That's what 20 people said today with their lives.
I think I still have a right to my own opinion.
I'm not taking it from you. I'm not taking it from you.
Christine, you're only standing here because he was here in the first place. So I don't know what you're talking about, having an individual life. Your life has been extended to the day that you're standing there because of him.
Voice back there, she has much right to speak there.
That's about the time he started passing out the poison. There were a large number of people who didn't want to do it, but there were armed guards at the doors who were shooting people down if they didn't. Attendants were injecting it into others with syringes, men, women, and children. They piled bodies on top of each other, and in the end, Jones never took the poison. He shot himself in the head. A quick death, unlike his followers. It wasn't a mass suicide. It was a mass murder-suicide. The most U.S. citizen deaths in history until September 11th. 909 people died that day. 4 people managed to escape once the poisoning started. And actually there were 83 other people who weren't at the compound when it happened, so you could call it 87 survivors technically. This is a goddamn shame. There's no doubt about it. But one thing that really bothers me about the whole event is the fact that it's used to define the word cult. When people hear the word cult now, they think mass suicide pact. They think one crazy leader at the top who's established themselves as God. One person who's trying to take advantage of your wife and your wallet. And that misconception continues to hurt people to this day. Jehovah's Witnesses refuse to accept the fact that they're in a cult, citing the dictionary definition, a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister, and pointing out that they don't have a single leader, so it doesn't apply to them, thus allowing their members to go on thinking they're in a super regular religion that isn't harmful or strange. But here are the criteria that people in the psychology community use to define a cult. This is Stephen Hassan's BITE model, as I mentioned earlier. It stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. These are the criteria. Under the behavior control category, do they promote dependence and obedience, modify behavior with rewards and punishments, dictate where and with whom you live, restrict or control sexuality, control clothing and hairstyle, regulate what and how much you eat and drink, deprive you of 7 to 9 hours of sleep, exploit you financially, restrict leisure time and activities, require you to seek permission for major decisions. Under information control, do they deliberately withhold and distort information? Forbid you from speaking with ex-members and critics. Discourage access to non-cult sources of information. Divide information into insider versus outsider doctrine. Generate and use propaganda extensively. Use information gained in confession sessions against you. Gaslight to make you doubt your own memory. Require you to report thoughts, feelings, and activities to superiors, and encourage you to spy and report on others' misconduct. And under thought control, we have instill black versus white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking, change your identity, possibly even your name, use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought, induce hypnotic or trance states to indoctrinate, teach thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts, allow only positive thoughts, use excessive meditation, singing, prayer, and chanting to block thoughts, and reject rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt. And then, in the final category, emotional control, we have instill irrational fears of questioning or leaving the group. Label some emotions as evil, worldly, sinful, or wrong. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to prevent anger or homesickness. Promote feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness. Shower you with praise or attention, called love bombing. Threaten your friends and family. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve. And finally, teach that there's no happiness or peace outside the group. If you guys are wondering where the People's Temple falls on the bite scale, come over to my channel tomorrow at 4 p.m. and we'll take a look. I'm also planning on discussing some little fun facts about them. As I said before, I grew up Jehovah's Witness, so I talk about them a lot. I also cover Mormons, Scientology, Heaven's Gate, Westboro Baptist Church, Mennonites, and a number of other cults. I've made it my life's mission to prevent the kind of events that happened at Jonestown. I won't stop talking about it as long as there's air in my lungs, because there are real people out there being affected right now, at this moment. So come check it out. Thanks, Professor Stick, for letting me come on your channel while you do stick things. That's all I've got for you. Thanks for watching, guys.